The universe's best doesn't fear the universe's second best. Wisdom of the Autumn Leaves, Mounted Philosopher, 2833 Current Error. Fui slid out from under the control panel, taking a quick second to button it up. He sat up, wiped the top of his T-shaped head, and then got to his feet. He reached out and tapped the display of the tablet that was secured to the pilot's seat with duct tape and glue. "This will work?" he asked. "It can't hurt," Schwa added. "Will it hit right?" he asked. "That's 200 meters of water. It will still have an effect. Not as much as it would hitting dry land, but better than nothing," Schwa answered. "All right, heading back," he said. "Good luck," Schwa said. Fui hurried out of the shuttle, taking the time to shut and lock the door. He moved over to the edge of the shuttle bay, climbed the ladder, and got inside the control room. He followed the directions Schwa had given him that she had read out of a manual. The fact he had not even thought to look in a manual for help with what he had done was still embarrassing. The fact he'd almost killed everyone was another. Still, he'd lowered the CO amount to safe levels at her instruction so that everyone could be saved when the atmosphere went back to normal. The lights went red in the shuttle bay, swirling and rotating. The sirens sounded, muted through the heavy armored glass of the control room, and the atmosphere was pumped out of the shuttle bay. Once that happened, he opened the shuttle bay door. The planet beyond was gorgeous, blue with scattered little points of brown that were the islands. It was daytime on the planet below, and he could see fluffy clouds in the sky. He tapped the Go icon on his wrist-mounted control. The shuttle lifted up, oriented, and began following the instructions that the autopilot had been loaded with. It moved out of the shuttle bay, tilting and moving at an angle, heading down toward the atmosphere as it fired its primary engines. Before the door shut behind it, it was gone from sight. The door thudded shut and the atmosphere pumped back in. Fui leaned back in the chair, mopping his hair on top of the conical back of his head. "I hope it works," Schwa said suddenly, making him jump. "Me too," Fui said. The false servant wore a scintillating robe, slippers that were curled at the toe end, and had jewelry on its head, on its arms, on its fingers. It stood on a purplish disk of energy, holding a staff topped with a crescent moon that had a crystal suspended in between the points of the purplish metal crescent. It had 3 eyes, 2 above the writhing tentacles that hid its cavernous maw, 1 in between and above the other 2. It had long fingered hands without fingernails or talons, bedecked with rings. Just the sight of it should have caused the Shretarowa to go face down on the floor, surrendering themselves to its might and power. Should have. Instead, it filled the demo frogs and the frog priests with nauseous rage, filled their blood with pounding anger, their mouths with a taste of blood, and their minds full of fury. We lifted the weapon up, socking it against his shoulder, and pulled the trigger quickly, banging out rounds one at a time. The rounds streaked across the room and exploded on an invisible curtain that suddenly appeared, pinkish and transparent, and looking as if it was made of beveled squares of nearly translucent pink quartz. Beyond the curtain, the false servant waved a staff, and the curtain solidified further. The others joined in, spreading out into an open-centered wedge with the 2 frog priests in the middle. The 2 machine gunners ran forward, throwing themselves behind larger suits of armor that had terrifying markings on them. They dropped the bipods on the chests of the armor, sighted at the false servant, and clamped down the trigger. The light machine guns added 525 rounds a minute, the weapons snarling as the belt went in one side and frangible links and expended brass flew out the other. The rounds hammered at the crystal shield, sending sprays of phasic energy out like sparks and chips. The grenadier fired, the 44mm round hitting and exploding, the HEDP round cracking out, and for a second it looked like a jagged hole had been torn in the crystal curtain. One LMG gunner got most of a burst through the curtain. Rounds sparked off an invisible barrier, and the pink globe appeared around the false servant, whose facial tentacles squirmed. Their third eye, above the other two, opened slightly as they motioned with the staff. The curtain rippled, the beveled squares shifting so that the curtain was whole again. We noted it didn't look as thick as before. It was more translucent than it had been. "Keep up the fire!" we shouted. The false servant waved the staff, and Moshini was picked up and thrown against the wall hard enough his faceplate popped off. One of his arms snapped and he fell to the ground, ribs cracked, concussed, arm broken. He made a high, fluting noise of pain as he slid down the wall to land awkwardly in a heap. Bliss chemicals started to seep into his bloodstream to keep away the pain. He still held tight to his weapon, drills and practice having made it so that he would be dead before he let it go, and maybe not even then. The compartment on the forearm of his armor detected the chemicals. The vials were tapped. 2 of them. Fury filled Moss' brain as the chemical rage poured into his system. He got to his feet, firing the rifle one-handed as he moved over next to the nearest frog priest, just like training had pounded into him. It didn't matter that everything was blurry. It didn't matter that he tasted blood, copper, and old leaves. It didn't matter that it hurt to breathe. No, killing that thing was all that mattered. The frog priest lowered his rifle, quickly starting first aid on the wounded demo frog, even as the demo frog kept firing. "Backblast area all clear," the frog priest called out. "Scatter! Clear the center!" We yelled out, following his own advice and running to the right as he changed his magazine out. The other demo frogs burst into motion, heading for the right or left wall, the LMG gunners grabbing their weapons by the carrying handle at the top of the receiver. One was grabbed by phasic power and thrown into the air. As he came down, his training had already kicked in from blanket tossing drills, allowing him to land safely. He rolled twice, changed magazines, and started firing again, ignoring the burning pain in his knee. The rockets streaked from the launcher, which the frog priest threw to the side, reaching onto his ruck to grab the second one of the 3 missiles it was his job to carry and deploy. The rocket hit the curtain and functioned perfectly. The osmium disk was inverted into a liquid stream, and the shape charge went off dead center of the curtain. The entire center shattered inward. The streak of molten metal jetted across the chamber and struck the globe around the false servant. The globe flared. The false servant shrieked in rage, but the globe held. "Nade out!" We one-handed a grenade, then went back to firing, down on his middle knee, rifle tucked in perfectly. The grenade flew out, through the ragged hole in the center of the curtain, and rolled underneath the false servant. A pink glimmering dome appeared over the grenade. 2 other demo frogs threw grenades through the hole. One was caught and englobed in midair. The other bounced once, twice, then was covered with a globe. The frog priest slapped the shoulder of the wounded demo frog, who crawled away as the frog priest added covering fire from his rifle. The other frog priest popped the metal lever, the covers dropping from each end of the rocket launcher. The grenades went off uselessly, but we noted that the first one, the one he had thrown, was muted the most, then the one caught in midair, but the one caught on the bounce actually shattered the hemisphere that covered it. "IT can't keep it up," we yelled. The gunners kept fire on the globe, hammering it, sending sparks showering. The other grenadier fired, the 44mm grenade flying through the hole to explode against the bubble the false servant was hiding in. White phosphorus sprayed out, leaving behind trails of smoke as the chunks burned. The false servitor flinched, memories of FOF and spooky particle WP bringing up a second of fright. The curtain wavered. The frog priest deployed the rocket launcher, yanking both ends away from another, the sight popping up. We threw another grenade, milking it and counting to 1.5. He sidearmed it, and it whipped through the gap. The false servant waved its staff. The curtain healed again. The burning pieces of WP were slowly filling the far side of the room with haze. The grenade went off in its face. knocking the sphere back against the wall and throwing the false servant to the bottom of the sphere. The frog priest lifted the rocket launcher to its shoulder and glanced behind it. The rounds hammered on the shield, probing it, looking for weak spots. Fury filled the minds, hearts, and blood of the demo frogs as they kept firing. "Backblast area all clear," the frog priest yelled again. The false servant lifted itself up inside the bubble with a shriek they could hear even over the weapons, a shriek that they heard claw at their brains, a shriek that was heard even in orbit and made Fui and Schwa flinch and ask each other if they knew what that was. The rocket hit the wall, and the heat round blew a huge chunk from the curtain in a spray of phasic energy. The osmium lance hit the bubble, leaving a smear across it. The false servant waved the staff, and the demo frogs and the frog priests found themselves lifted into the air. Both grenadiers fired their weapons anyway, training that had consisted of tying a rope around them and swinging them upside down while they operated, cleared, or loaded their weapons as their fellows hit them with padded sticks carrying through what would have rendered any other Shretarawa paralyzed with terror. The false servant lifted the staff, and we fired his weapon, upside down, blood pounding in his ears. The two 44mm grenades, one WP, the other full of artillery marking powder, hit dead center. The WP flared. The powder coated the bubble. The false servant both flinched and threw the demo frogs away from it rather than ripping them to pieces, memories of FOF rearing up again. The Atrekna dimly heard the howling cries of the mad lemurs of terror. The entire frog team flew through the air, two hitting the wall, the Rocketeer frog priest flying into the hallway. They hit and rolled, slapping at the ground to bleed away the energy. Two popped up immediately, firing their weapons. One frog priest hit the edge of the doorway in the middle of the back and flopped face down onto the ground. He didn't get up. The frog priest in the hallway ignored the taste of blood, ignored the pain, feeling the injections in his forearm as he pulled out the last rocket, blind in the middle and left side. That was all right. He would just use his right eye to sight. We popped up, swapping magazines and shooting as he advanced. The false servant was hidden by the artillery marking powder, but the bullets howled off of the bubble. The frog priest face down lifted his head as the chemical rage still pounded through his veins. He couldn't feel his legs, but that didn't matter when he spotted his weapon. Coughing blood inside his helmet, he crawled forward, grinning with blood-streaked square teeth. The curtain wavered, the blocks shifted, and it was whole again. The frog priest in the hallway felt malevolence manifest in front of him, and took 2 steps as he yanked the rocket open. "Get ye behind me, thou false servant," he thought, taking 3 long steps, ignoring the pain in his legs. He knelt down, raising the launcher to his shoulder. We felt it more than knew it was coming and ducked down, the other 2 frogs doing the same. An arc of purple energy flashed out, barely passing over their heads. Nweep's ruck was bisected over his back, and the outside fell off, the synthetic cloth blackening and melting. The frog priest grabbed his rifle and started firing. The other frog priest fired the rocket. The flames hit the barrier that was supposed to cause the rocket to go off prematurely, rebounding to wrap around the frog priest, whose armor held. The rocket lanced out, shrieking, and detonated on the curtain. The entire thing exploded in a shower of purple phasic energy, knocking all 3 demo frogs off their feet again. The Rocketeer frog priest staggered forward, trying to work the action on his rifle, tugging weakly at the charging handle. The false servant, visible again, waved the staff. All of the demo frogs and the 2 frog priests were lifted up. Their limbs started flexing, the psychic power trying to bend them into knots. "It should be hitting about now," Schwa said. "I hope it does some good," Fui answered her. The false servant waved one hand, and we saw Onwee's back break, felt his own joints scream in protest even as he struggled to get free of the invisible tentacles holding and twisting him. At Mach 8 the shuttle slammed into the surface of the ocean, off by nearly 2 kilometers. Seawater turned to vapor as the fire around the shuttle converted it to steam. Nwani's mid and upper knees snapped, his legs bending backwards as the demo frog screamed. Moss' rifle dropped from his hand as it was twisted from his grip and snapped in two. The shuttle, moving at Mach 6, hit the ocean bed and exploded, driving a hammer deep into the bedrock. We snarled, spitting out the breather, as he felt his joints start to burn. He couldn't hold out much longer, but he didn't care as synthetic hatred poured into his bloodstream. His rifle snapped in the middle, the upper half falling to dangle from the sling. The entire world suddenly shook with a low rumble. The false servant screeched. The demo frogs and the frog priests found themselves thrown across the room again, to slam against the wall and slide down. We lay on the floor, staring. His concussed mind was full of fury that wiped away any traces of bliss. He could see a great enemy laying next to him, its hand around a grenade that still had the pin in it. As he watched, the armored fingers relaxed. We didn't know what it would do, but he knew a grenade when he saw it. He snatched it up, struggled to one knee as he yanked the pin, and came to his feet as he whipped it overhand. It missed as we reached back and drew his sword from behind his back, the heavy crude steel a comfortable familiar weight in his hand. "I've come to kill you," he whispered, blood dripping from his lower lip. The grenade went off with a massive explosion that was preceded by a ring of gold and a ring of purple. There was a screech, and we stared in disbelief as the bubble vanished and the false servant fell unceremoniously to the floor. It looked up, and we realized it was dazed. "Demo frogs!" we yelled, breaking into a run. The false servant got to its feet suddenly, bleeding from its third eye. It saw we running at it and brought up a shining blade of pure psychic energy. Vrak felt like sneering. He was a master of the psychic blade, and the foolish servitor was running at it with a blade of crude steel. Of course, the blasted Lima grenade had savaged his senses, the chronotron and phasic energy shower having left his nerves and flesh burning. Vrak took the third stance with his blade, inviting the foolish servitor to engage his skill with the... We ran up and started swinging the blade with both hands, screaming as he did so. No thought, no skill, just hacking at the false servant with everything he had. Vrak found himself reeling in shock. There was no art here, no grace, no elegance. The servitor just screamed like it was mad, and unleashed a furious blinding barrage of two-handed swings. We chopped to the left, then the right, then the left, screaming the entire time. The false servant's blade snapped off Wee's left eye, severing the eye stalk. We didn't care. "Kill you!" we screamed, his blows coming faster and faster. Vrak was doing everything he could just to keep the insane servitor off of him. No chance for elegant riposte, no change for a quick feint, just block, 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 block. Vrak saw an opening as the servitor brought the blade back behind its head with both hands. He quickly thrust. We felt the psychic blade slide through his guts and out his back. He didn't care. "Die!" he screamed as he stepped into it and slammed his damaged and wounded face into the false servant's, and spit blood into the false servant's face. Vrak jerked back as the blood splashed his face. For a split second the servitor was replaced by the insane Lima. He took a step back, yanking his blade from the Lima. No, the servitor's guts. We howled in victory and swung his sword from behind him with everything he had, putting his shoulder, his backs, his hips, his thighs into it. Something snapped in the muscles of his back, but he didn't care. The heavy steel sword hit at the point of the false servant's head, ripped through the skull lengthwise, through the throat, exposing the windpipe for a second, down through the chest, splintering and shattering the cartilage ribs, through the guts, to shatter the pelvis and exit the body. The channel was only 4 inches deep. Only. The false servant fell backwards. We leaned against his sword, panting. "Demo frogs, sound off," he called out. 4 weak voices answered. The Rocketeer Frog Priest got to his feet, slowly and painfully, and made his way toward the nearest wounded Demo Frog. We watched, chemical fury still pounding in his veins, as the false servant gurgled and trembled, then shit itself. The last Atrekna died on the floor, not at the hands of a mad lemur of terror, not from the fury of one of the inheritors of madness, but by the Demo Frogs. The universe liked that.